So today we'll be talking about bullying, harassment, and abuse. So this is an important topic because there's a growing community. It's easier to set practices that are right within quotes in the first time than try to relearn something that we've picked up. So and just like how we've been speaking about the collective conscious for the last couple of sessions, it's easier to teach tougher subjects when there is a group, especially subjects that are social psychology. Because, well, when you maybe approach it as an individual and try to like tell them, it gets very personal and it becomes a way in which people are sort of questioning their own value systems and acting from them. So, sort of judging people for not knowing and things like that, which is why it's easier when it's institutionalized into objective practices by the team for the team. Well, so moving on. So let's look at um, bullying, harassment, and abuse. Let's look at what they are. So, bullying is seeking to harm, intimidate, or coerce. Harassment is aggressive pressure or intimidation. Abuse is improper treatment with cruel, violent intentions, which is regular, repeated. So when we come and when we sort of take a look at what's the common theme in all of these things, and obviously there's a little bit of a difference in all of this, in each of these terms, but you can, it's tough to sort of encompass everything and say this is what goes into this. My personal belief is like you don't suddenly become a bully when you are 20 or 25. These are things that are been set up for you or you set up for yourself in some ways, and that's how you sort of promote the system of abuse. So what's the common theme here is, well, it's, whoa, skipped a slide, sorry. Okay, as you can see in my slide, I've said the common theme is misuse of power, and it is somewhere about power and control. So that's one common theme. Other than that, there's also some sort of an intention to harm.
Uh, Sangeet, sorry,
Yeah.
there's a bit of a disturbance in your audio.
Okay.
I don't know what to do about it, but just letting you know.
Is it my internet?
No, now it's fine. Actually, there was just for like a second, it was a bit fuzzy, but now it seems okay. Sorry, continue.
Okay, okay. Just let me know. I can always connect from my phone or something
Sure,
because
sure.
it seems to be acting up for some reason.
Okay, sure. We'll
Okay.
let you know.
So, okay, going back to common themes, one thing that connects all of these things are misuse of power. So, when there is a bully and a bullied, there's a harasser and a harassed, or an abuser and an abused, there is always some sort of a power play here, or a need for control, or for the need to sort of exhibit control. And apart from that, there is also intention to harm, and it usually occurs in situations where there is a perceived imbalance in power. So there is some sort of an imbalance that this one person is maybe trying to take use of, is unaware of, or is acting from there. So if it becomes two friends sort of talking about something or teasing each other, right, then there is an equal power play there. If your boss teases you or your captain teases you, then you might not be as comfortable to retort as you wish, as you would have done with your friend. So that is the imbalance in perceived imbalance in power situation. And to a certain extent, the target has some difficulty in expressing themselves and in stopping this from happening to them. So speaking up is some sort of a, there is some barrier that stops the victims from doing that. So these are the common themes, and harassment is basically like bullying behavior that's shown towards protected groups or minorities. So legally, at least, like you can be racist, that would come under harassment. You could be sexist, that would come under harassment. If there's some sort of a workplace gender-based harassment, then all of that would go there. They can also be bullying. Harassment is maybe cleaner to sort of identify. Bullying is harder to identify, and abuse is maybe the hardest of them all to sort of point out and identify and say, unless it's one of the victim or it's the abuser themselves coming forward and saying this. Moving on. One sec. Let me see what's up next. Cool. So we'll quickly spend a couple of seconds on types of bullying and bullies, because as we said, um, the characteristics of an abuser or a harasser or a bully is not that different, but the intensity with which and the surety with which they act is very, very different. And also, abuse is not dependent on, say, okay, so we'll get to that in a bit. So types of bullying: you have physical bullying, you have verbal bullying, you have relational aggression, which is like, if you are this person's friend, I will not talk to you. There is cyberbullying, there's sexual bullying, there's social bullying, and there's bullying that comes out of prejudices. And we also see how some types of bullies are made in the in society. So there are popular bullies who's, one sec, I made some notes so that I don't forget. So you have popular bullies who have big egos, they're confident, they're condescending. It either comes from their upbringing, their socioeconomic status, their popularity, and also the size of their ego state, I mean. And to a certain extent, peers tolerate this bully because they'd rather be accepted than be bullied by them or not be in their goodwill, so to say. You have victim bullies, who are people who've been bullied before and now think this is the way in which the world works, which is you either step on someone or you get stepped on. So they sort of adapt and make this a coping mechanism, where they find release in retaliating in this way because they are in pain. And to an extent, this is also learned behavior, where they say, yeah, this is the way of the world. A lot of masochism, gender roles as to how men need to act, how women need to act, what it means to be masculine, all of that comes under, to a certain extent, contributes to these victim turned bullies. You have relational bullies, which is, they're somewhat popular, but they also sort of, they're maybe they're like a couple of, they're the sidekicks, you could say, and they enjoy verbal and emotional bullying. They enjoy gossip, slander, rumors, label, name calling. Definitely a way of bullying. Like, there are ways in which you can give somebody a nickname where you think it's funny, but it doesn't need to be at all. So we spoke about this a little bit last time. And your relational bullies are also maybe passive aggressive, they're very conditional, and they decide who is accepted and who isn't. So yeah, you can call them your typical mean girls. Also, I think it's an amazing movie just to get an insight of what teenagers are like. And they also want to be part of the in crowd. So this is where a relational bully functions from. And then you have serial bullies. They are controlled, calculated, skilled, manipulative. They're liars. They're sweet. They're caring. They look innocent, but, well, that is either personality trait or coping methodology, and also to a certain extent narcissism, where they have something to gain. So these people are very calculated. These bullies are very calculated in the way they function. We have group bullies, which is probably something we all experienced or witnessed or have been part of at some point, where it feels okay. It's a pack mentality. It happens in a group. You feel insulated because you're not the only one. And because you're not the only one, then maybe it's not that wrong also, right? Because there are so many people to sort of reassure yourself of why you're doing this. And often, like, the reason that's given for these group bullying or group teasing fun activities is that, it's all in good fun and joy and whatnot. But what is not definitely fun is when there is an imbalance in power. There's an imbalance in power in group bullies because you have 5 or 6 people against one, and that is definitely in it's not an equity with regards to power distribution in any case. So they imitate the leader or the group or the follower. So that's a group bully. And you have indifferent bullies. Indifferent bullies are probably they well, to a certain extent, they are going through some sort of neurosis, which is a mild mental condition. um, they are vicious, they are unable to feel empathy, they're cold, unfeeling, detached, they have little remorse, they bully for the sheer entertainment of it, and they are not deterred by disciplinary actions. So these are the types of bullies that we've seen, and these sort of characteristics that we've seen in these people, right? Which is sort of working from an ego state. And so, anyway, so all of those things of, how they act, how they perceive people, what they think is okay to do for gains, or what they think is fun, all of these are somewhere sort of internalized words, right? Fun is internalized by somebody, going back to the power of knowledge, the power of language and the way it's sort of appropriated or used. These are all words that each person has sort of maybe understood differently. So, well, trigger warning for people if you need it. But with regards to type of abuse, you have physical, you have sexual, you have verbal, emotional, you have mental or psychological, you have cultural, identity, financial, and neglect. So physical is pretty straightforward. When you are, well, you're not supposed to be hitting people, so if you hit people off the table, that's physical abuse. Sexual is when you coerce people into having sexual relationships with you, or you sort of blame them for like their choices, or you say you try to put value judgments on your partner, usually because sexual abuse happens within partnerships. You put value judgments on your partner when they are willing to be sexual with you and when they're not willing to be open. Verbal emotional abuse is when, well, through words, and they obviously affect emotionally, and they're not going to hit you physically, they hit you somewhere. Mental psychological abuse is when the abuser sort of questions the sanity of the victim, or tries to tell them that they are not okay, that only they feel this way, or they are going crazy, things like that, which sort of affects the stability and ability to be assertive by the victim. There's cultural and identity abuse, which is when you say you can't practice this religion, or you can't wear sleeveless, or you can't say change your gender uh, to meet who you feel like you are, and things like that. Financial abuse is when a person is not responsible for themselves, and they well, cause you burdens, and they are okay with way well, they're okay with burdening you, and they full well know that they're doing it, and they don't want to take responsibility because it works for them. Again, when it comes to abuse, one difference, or one thing I want to point out, which is not common, is bullying and harassment can be from people you've just met or people you don't know. But abuse is sort of something that requires a lot more interaction, because it is something that happens in close interpersonal spaces, and it happens when there is this closeness that's been built over some time. For it, I mean, if somebody, I mean, how do I guess what I'm trying to say is, when this type of a behavior comes from an interpersonal relationship, that's when it's more shocking, or it's more effective, unfortunately, in being abusive. Mm, so let's move on to why do we bully, harass, and abuse. So I'm gonna like sort of say at some point or the other, all of us have been bullied. And if you're a girl, chances are you've probably been harassed to in some ways or the other. And I'm not gonna try and justify this. So when we've all sort of bullied in one way or the other, and I've done this, I've done this where with Airbenders, actually, there were a bunch of kids, poor guys, who were sort of trying to do some wheelies or donuts on the field. And I got majorly annoyed with that because, well, everybody's on the field, there's something happening. And I straight up went, and I knew I was going to be intimidating, and I still went through with it because I wanted them to be intimidated. To a certain extent, that is bullying. And I knew very well that I was bullying, but I still chose to do it. So I'm just saying, we're all not saints, right? We can't not have bullied at all. So there are two types of sort of enabling things that help you continue bullying or start bullying, however you want to look at it, or even get bullied, continue getting bullied, and continue getting well, I don't know what I meant. Anyway, sorry. Going back to this, I've lost track of my thoughts. Okay. So going back to enabling aspects that are there around us. So we have some self-enabling aspects, which is the ego state. Ego state is simply the transaction between people and how they are talking to each other. So you can either interact with somebody from an adult ego state, or a parent ego state, or a child ego state. So if somebody is sort of interacting with you from a parent ego state, chances are they're going to come off sounding like a parent. And if that is sort of normalized, then how do parents sound? Parents sound sure of themselves. Parents are supposed to blah, 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 blah. So whatever it is that they've internalized as to what it means to hold power in a family or things like that, that's what gets transferred into your ego states. And it could be personality type. It could be, it could be choice. And that also we've seen in the type of bullies. It could also be learned behavior, which is something that we saw. It could be because they have some gains, or because, well, this is the way they think right now. And along with some stereotypes and prejudices, right, or personal gains, which is where the our last session on personal bias sort of comes in. Because, well, without sort of knowing your limitation or knowing where you stand on these different things, and without knowing how much of a bully you are, you cannot really say you want to change the system, or you want to set uh, better systems in practice. Social enablers are, well, to a large extent in our society, discrimination is normalized. It is, for example, like, say, if you were a girl, you would have heard, like, be safe, come back by sunset, don't go out in the dark, don't stay out late, things like that. That is normalization of discrimination of a certain gender by our parents, by our seniors, by generations of people who say, yeah, the way to sort of do this is to maybe like protect and not empower, or give them the show them the precautions that they can take. So normalization of discrimination is a thing. And normalization also happens because of economic class. Maybe somewhere we expect a certain sex to be more egoistic, or to be mm, to throw more tantrums, or we're okay with certain behaviors being exhibited by certain sex and not by certain sex. So to a certain extent, there is social enablement, and also who you hang out with, your personal circle. How assertive are they? How inclusive are they? And how much are they a bystander or an enabler to your own prejudices? And with regards to looking at this from a bullied state of mind, a person who is bullied or being abused can sort of resort to thinking that they deserve the abuse, that they are dumb, that it isn't even happening, that only they think of it this way, that nobody else will believe it, and that they have no way out of something like that. So, and again, there is a, to a certain extent, there's normalization of, being expected to sort of be discriminated against too. So there is both ways, where we normalize bullies doing their bullying work, and we normalize the way somebody who is bullied needs to feel. So if you look at mass media, and that's where a lot of kids learn, pick up personality traits, right? So media exposure, or it's either learned or perceived or seen behavior. So when it's like that, then in media, in popular Indian media at least, when there is talk of rape in traditional cinema, there is always talk of, the victims sort of useless state, or how they've been degraded, or they've lost value and things like that. So when we talk about things like that on social media, on mass media, we are to a certain extent normalizing the behavior of the bully and the bullied. So let's look at where do we start. And
Sangi, I have a quick question. I just
yes,
want to
ma'am.
understand something. So, for example, like I just want to maybe share something with you, so you can kind of help me understand where it falls.
Mm-hmm.
So I think this is something that I've seen happen. Maybe I think I might have even been part of such an engagement where you are. I think this also comes back to Gaurav's question of being harassed or bullied like off field. I
Mm-hmm.
think as a team, you have a lot of interactions with each other, and I don't want to say the word carried away, because I don't think there may be an engagement. For example, I may be talking to Gaurav and both of us are joking about Tarun, like TK. So while we're talking, we do not mean to cause harm. We do not mean to hurt his feelings, but there may be something that we say which he might not even react to, but then he feels affected by it. So
Mm-hmm.
where does that fall under, where we are actually I guess
Okay,
exhibiting bullish behavior, but we are not aware of it, and it wasn't the
perfect.
intention to bully? So where does that
Yeah.
fall?
Correct. So I think, like, maybe you've led me right into this whole thing of, where do we start with abuse itself? Because abuse, clearly, yes, the, like, we are all parts of society, but there's something more than that, right? There is some sort of systemic
uh,
inequality that comes
Audio is
along with
fuzzy again. Okay,
oh
wait, it's back
no.
on. It's back on.
I
As
said
soon as I
there
said
is
it, it's
some
fine.
sort of a systemic inequality that comes along with abuse, or the system of abuse. So when it comes to so I how I see it, right? There's an awareness component, there's a mobility component, and an action component. And there's literally no bad place to start or right place to start. So all three pillars of this needs to be addressed when we are setting practices, because to a certain extent, maybe we've normalized speaking about somebody, like, just going back to your question, right? It's normalized that we talk about somebody a certain way, or it's normalized when, I make a joke about somebody who's my close friend. So when it's me versus that person, again, the power dynamics is different. Me plus another person about that person, the dynamics is different. So at the end of the day, it comes down to sort of maybe asking and knowing. So with regards to awareness, I would say assume people don't know. So again, both to the bully and the bully, maybe the bully doesn't know that they are functioning in a way that is making somebody uncomfortable, and maybe the bully doesn't know that they're getting bullied. So awareness, starting with that assumption, is a good place to start. Second thing we need to sort of be very careful about is not shaming this lack of knowledge, because here you have an open conversation. So say you have a violator of some sort, and let's take the example of interpersonal teammate relationship inside a in a frisbee team, obviously. So just like how Madhu, you were talking about feeling close or talking about somebody, right, who you are close to. I could feel close to, say, two boys and two girls on my team whom I'm okay hugging and touching and things like that. And whereas, or even talking about certain aspects of my life or game and all of those things. So maybe they have more of an in. Um, just because I'm comfortable physically and emotionally with these four people doesn't mean everybody gets to ask for that. So, that brings us to the mobility point, which is to teach people to draw boundaries and be assertive. So if we shame this person who's sort of violating a boundary, right, what happens is probably they will never bring that up again, or they will never say, you will lose the opportunity to interact with them in a manner where maybe it's a two-way communication where you can also understand where this other person is coming from. I'm not saying whoever is getting bullied needs to have all of this energy, resource, and space to go have this conversation, but as systems, we can create this. We need to be vocal about injustice, whatever that may be, and however we see that. We need to ask and be supportive. So we are not, you don't be supportive because of your own agenda. This is, say you are the friend of a bullied or a bullied, don't be supportive just because, like, this is how I know to be supportive. Maybe ask them what kind of support they would need. Create opportunities to talk about abuse, educate, and set practices. And my favorite of all, catch them young. So these are the ways in which we can sort of start awareness so that we reduce the vicious cycle of abuse. And then with regards to mobility, well, we have teach to draw boundaries slash assertiveness. Assertiveness is ability to say no. Assertiveness is ability to sort of be confident in the things that you want, and to be able to express them. And that expression is the key part of assertiveness. It's not just knowing, but it's also ability to say and establish what it is. And also, boundaries are usually seen as a bad thing. That's probably because, like in a traditional Indian family, boundaries are a bad thing. How can you ask for privacy? How can you keep secrets, etc., etc.? But boundaries actually sort of come from a state where you and let me think about this for a second. So boundaries help sort of regulate what goes in and what comes out. That is sort of like the purpose of a boundary. It's not a bad thing or a good thing, but it's good to say, like, say, establish when there is a microaggression to start with. Establish this boundary and sort of be assertive about what we are okay with and what we are not. So yeah. The next thing we can do is we can teach self-confidence as part of our collective conscious. We can support victims in finding their voice, however long that takes, in whatever way they need to. We need to be empathetic. We need to set practices for respectful communication and conflict resolution. What happens a lot of the time is when individuals are incapable of resolving a conflict between themselves, we have to take it to a third party or somebody else in the system or outside of the system. What happens sometimes within teams, especially, or within communities, it becomes a very pure judged based judiciary system where peers have a say in what somebody thinks of you, or in everything. So that sort of leads to more misconceptions, more rumors, or more sort of it takes the control, or it takes the power away from the victim, and it sort of gives it to the public to sort of comment. And if the public wants to empathize, they will. If they don't want to, they will victim blame, which is going back to going back to why we need to set respectful communication and conflict resolution skills as something that we teach and we ask for in the collective conscious of our team. um don't normalize discrimination. Speak up, whatever it is. If it's a nickname that sort of refers to somebody by their color of their skin, or if it's one sec, I have some chat. Is it about not being audible?
No, that was just me saying the call might
Oh,
drop in 5 minutes.
sorry.
No worries.
Okay. um so yeah, you can sort of mm, I don't know how to explain don't normalize discrimination. I guess you guys get it. Moving on to action. Well, action starts with self work, like what Madhu pointed out rightly. The coolest thing is, Madhu, that you are sort of thinking of this and saying, hey, am I doing the right thing? And that is the self work we are talking about, because somewhere we are all products of society. And if we don't maybe take that time to understand the extent of, say, influence on certain aspects or certain ways we function or certain behaviors, then we will not be able to catch the things that we sort of don't want to promote. um don't protect, empower. So even when yeah, in your workplaces, in your families, wherever it is, try not to protect people or try not to put your fear on them. Try to instead maybe give them ways in which you figured out you can overcome this fear. Create support systems for victims. So this is another thing. So a lot of the times, um, it's important to, even if you're not, even as a victim, if I'm not assertive enough to go confront my abuser, what I can do or what I need to do is create this small support system. Identify at least this one other person who's sort of, who will listen to my reality of stuff. So this support system is essential in victims being able to break the mold, or stop the cycle of abuse, which is essentially speak up for themselves and hold boundaries. We need to hold systems and organizations accountable. So when we have peer leaders, when we have captains, we cannot take less than respectful behavior from them. If they want to cut some slacks, as a captain, as a leader, as somebody who's important in the team, it's even more important that these people sort of are held accountable and they don't promote bullying or just slander or any sort of discrimination depending based on their prejudices. Also, a prejudice like discrimination based on prejudice can just be as simple as, this person travels a lot, just call it travel anytime they throw. Or this person will get angry if you do this, just keep doing this and you will win a game. To a certain extent, that is also some sort of an emotional bullying. um, Amplify voices, perspectives. It's most important that we hear perspectives that are not like our own, so that we can understand the extent of it, so that we can make sure we do have more than one perspective, because one perspective is probably one person's truth. um, and also amplify voices that are maybe speaking up to sort of safeguard themselves from bullying and things like that. You might have noticed something, so you can always say, hey, no, like, you can stop it, it's not funny, or please stop. These are like, no, stop, these are all great ways which also act as a first defense with regards to a sense assertiveness. Make use of expertise. So when you are setting up new organization systems, definitely call in expertise that can help you out. And this is something maybe we don't do enough with regards to psychology. We think, okay, we're all human, I understand how my friend works, so I'll be okay. But sometimes it's important to have a third person's perspective and see what they have to say. Have a clear consequence reformations for violators. So put all of these down in place, saying, like, what are we going to do if this happens in our team, right? Maybe to a certain extent, India Ultimate has put down that practice now, where they say they have a player protection policy, but it's important for people to know what the consequence of violation will be. So, with regards to self work, right, I just want to give a quick tip, or like maybe you've heard this. Like, we all say, treat somebody like anything you do to others, Yeah, treat somebody the way you would treat yourself. Maybe the way to reframe that would be to treat somebody the way they want to be treated. Because just one more thing to note in all of this, as much as these forms of abuse, bullying, and harassment can be exhibited upon other people, bullies, harassers, and abusers, maybe to a certain extent, are also capable of extending the same kind of harassment and language to themselves. Um, so yeah, anything you do to others, you probably do to yourself. So yeah, just hat tip on how we can start or go about self work. Any questions or comments? Like, I wanted to give you an example maybe of how somebody with boundaries or who's assertive would behave in a certain situation versus somebody who is sort of subjecting themselves to get bullied or who is getting bullied in that situation. So, like, say, you've dropped a catch and somebody on the other sideline or somebody is like, walking by, comments about your inability to like catch the disc, and they're just like, yeah, you're like this, you don't know what to do, or you can't catch. Somebody who lacks boundaries and assertiveness could, well, let this remark, statement in the passing get to them. It can become, a sense of uselessness, a sense of defeat, shame, sadness, etc. And their thoughts could be, like, yeah, I suck, this person who's played at this level has said this to me, therefore, that blah blah blah, how could I have dropped this, now everybody's going to talk about it, etc., etc. And obviously your behavior is going to reflect on the kind of thoughts that you're having and how protected your conscious is with regards to things like this. So, well, you might start having a poorer game, you might start dropping more discs, you might have slumped shoulders, you might take out that annoyance on your teammates or your close friend, things like that. Say somebody who's worked on themselves, who's worked on setting these boundaries, on being assertive, would just say, yeah, cool, maybe you don't have anything better to do, so you're going to comment on the things that I do, or it's okay if I dropped it once, I'm going to catch it again the next time, or just watch me catch it next time. So, and their behavior could be where either they don't care about this remark at all, they've said, yeah, cool, like it's in the passing, it's not really cool, but whatever, this person feels the need to express themselves like this. And it could also, like, it need not reflect in their game or in their behavior at all. So yeah, that's probably the end of my session. Do we have any questions or comments? I think the biggest contribution that all of us can do with regards to, setting up our collective conscious is teaching people this assertiveness skill and the ability to say no, and is by saying it's okay to draw boundaries. Because even in a collective conscious, that's what you're sort of trying to teach them. You're trying to teach them to take responsibility for their emotional and mental well-being before coming out onto the team and sort of using that as a training ground to work through their emotions. Yes, Nandini.
One second, I'm just going through the notes that I've made. They look better than last time, so I'll share them with you. um, you had mentioned, like towards the beginning of it, you had said something about setting practices with a group better than having one-on-one conversations. I mean, I've never really tried to do the setting practices as a group because for me personally, I find it easier to have conversations one-on-one. Like if, I mean, it might not even be something that someone has done something to me, but maybe someone has a different opinion about it.
Yeah.
probably. And then they reach out to me and I'm like, okay, so this is your opinion, but this is my opinion. And I felt that in that span of whatever hour, 45 minutes we spent talking about it, I felt as if I've actually made impact and conveyed this perspective about, I mean, this was regarding harassment and bullying, gender-based that too. So that way, I mean, I found it easier to have one-on-one conversations. So how would you generally go? I mean, how would you go about this setting a practice?
So one-on-one conversations are the sort of, they're the best when it comes to addressing things that have already happened, because you cannot sort of put precautionary things on, you can't have precautionary one-on-one talks with people where they've not violated something. So I'm not saying this or this is the best. One-on-one conversations definitely, but they also require a lot more commitment, a lot more emotional work, a lot more emotional resource from the person who's initiating this conversation and from the person who's listening. So if there is willingness to listen, then yes, definitely nothing like a one-on-one conversation where it's just the concerned people speaking about this, figuring it out for themselves. With regards to precautionary measures, it is harder to teach one-on-one precautionary measures. It's easier to teach it as a group. And with regards to group, it can start off because we have the context for it already, which is performance, which is playing together, which is having fun. Whatever it is, we have a context as a group to learn a skill. Just like how everybody on the team learns a strategy where they say, um, word stack often means primary in, primary out. If it doesn't work, come back and clear. This is sort of a similar game plan in trying to teach objective ways in which we can take precautionary measures so that we are not in a place where we have to have one-on-one conversations. It's
Right.
really hard, like once it's happened, right? And that's where you sort of, that's where mostly you find out about bullying or harassment or abuse, once it's happened and once somebody feels a certain way. So while it's happening, once it's happened, if the person can, if both of them or if all of them can, definitely interpersonal conversations. And kudos to you for being able to do that.
So
um,
could you like give an example of how that can be done? Like, especially, I mean, I've some years ago I had tried doing these workshops for children, which kind of make them a little mindful and aware about what harassment could look like for them. We didn't conduct too many because we didn't have any people to support us in terms of money and time and everything. But my question, I mean, let me rephrase this. The kind of impact that can be achieved by willing one-on-one conversations, how can a similar degree of impact be achieved in a group? Because in a group, it's more like you're asking people to do something, and sometimes they'll understand why, sometimes they'll come up and ask why you need to do something or practice certain things. But not all the time they'll actually internalize these practices.
Correct.
So how would you go about that?
Correct. So internalization is all, I don't want to say always, but it is going to be that one step that doesn't sort of, that one step that we need to, as individuals, engage in. Nobody else can internalize it for us. So with regards to the collective conscious, what maybe we're trying to do when we're setting that up is that we're not just saying like collective conscious is only for the good stuff. So we are going to practice being punctual, or we are going to practice being committed, whatever that means. We are also going to practice being respectful. And being respectful means blah, 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 blah. So now by just talking about this as a need to learn or a space to learn, maybe we've started this conversation on, or maybe even a thought process on why this is coming up. And when this is being discussed, right, this will sort of maybe acknowledge the gap in knowledge where sometimes people don't know with, they don't know what is bullying, or they don't know what is sexual harassment. And that's where, like, I think coming back to one-on-one conversations, right? I don't think, like, I would advocate for a victim, so to say, or somebody who's been harassed, for them to be in a position where they have to go back and have this conversation. If they're willing to do that, amazing, great. But we shouldn't normalize that much of a ask from somebody who's just gotten, from somebody who's getting bullied. Um, so with regards to that, like, it's amazing that it happens, but maybe it need not happen that way. And if we can come back to internalization in collective conscious, I
Yeah.
think one way in which you'd be really effective is if your leaders sort of consciously, intentionally created objective practices, saying, hey, we have a new person, so we will not, we will always ask, like in coaching, something that I teach all of my coaches is that before you touch somebody, or before you show them how to throw a forehand, don't just go touch them and show them, ask for permission. So simple things where assertiveness is taught both to the people who could potentially become bullies and to the people who could get bullied. um yeah.
Right. I guess that goes back to the extending the external language on self. I mean, that's how I'm connecting it at
Yeah.
least.
So you could never, I don't think you can be an effective teacher, especially in a group setting where people are expected to look at you and function and, modify their behavior. Um, everything will get caught. And maybe people will not come and point out saying, hey, this is what our team says, but you are doing this now. But they are definitely noticing it, and it's definitely part of your collective conscious.
Right. Thanks.
Yeah. With regards to internalization, again, it becomes so much easier when we just put it down in words. What does it mean to be respectful of genders, right? You can put down a bunch of do's and, like, don'ts, and that itself will start off with the, like we were talking about, knowledge, which is the first thing as to what is okay and what is not okay. And if we can set this practice within our team, within Frisbee, then maybe we can hope for it to be sort of translated into rest of their lives. Because, like, at least with regards to Frisbee as a tool of learning and change, right, that's how I see it. It gives us an opportunity where we can learn a lot of life skills and maybe use it in outside life. For example, I think one revelation for me was when you just, like, stop and ask for perspective, and you don't get angry, and you don't yell, and you don't feel like, upset when something doesn't go your way. You simply understand that there are different perspectives. And that's something that really gave me, to a certain extent, a lot of understanding about, how I can see things that happen in the world. Similarly, how to interact respectfully with another gender, or even these gender roles to a certain extent, is redefined in Ultimate Frisbee. So maybe we can take that extra step to redefine them and bulletproof it, so that, we are efficient in bringing about change and sort of maybe stopping this cycle of abuse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any other question, guys? Sangi,
No,
just
I don't have any questions.
cool. AP, anything? You've been very quiet, AP.
No, I'm just here to listen to the conversation. I absolutely enjoyed listening to all of it, especially the Q&A, that the question that Nandini asked. I thought that was really pertinent. Yeah.
Cool. So Sangi, I think I'm just trying to I'm trying to kind of recollect a lot of these things that's happened and just see what I can kind of, I guess, get out of you. I think this is again something that's happened a lot. Like, I remember this incident very clearly. So, for example, there was this one. I think we were trying to do a drill or whatever. So, the person with the disc is being, I guess, spoken to or like, you know, there are people who are trying, I mean, in their mind, they're only trying to help. So there are 3 of them who are kind of talking to or at this person, where, you know, again, it is not meant to actually harm them, but as a person who is possibly new and is, you know, is put in like a high pressure situation for them, and at that moment, how do you kind of, I mean, I don't know how to phrase this better, but how do you kind of not feel like a victim? Like, how do you kind of take yourself away from the situation where, I mean, I guess in hindsight, you know that they're not trying to bully you and they actually mean well, but it is
there is no space for, you know, good intention if it doesn't come through in action, right? You can keep all of your good intentions, and it need not reflect in any productive way or nurturing way. So it happens often, and maybe there's some sort of a power imbalance also. So it could be that this person with the disc is junior on the senior, like them, or it's just about what to do better.
Sorry, audio is fuzzy. Could you repeat that?
Yeah, speaker is not working.
Whoops.
Is this better?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. So yeah, there's some sort of a power dynamic in play or imbalance in play, right? It's one person who's on the field versus 3 people who are, or like with the disc, versus 3 people who have nothing to do with the throw at all. And you know, a lot of the times I think we sort of maybe misinterpret what it means to coach and where we need to coach. A lot of our coaching happens like on the field, when somebody is doing something during the game, during the tournament. That's when like we tend to remember all of the things that we've learned and all of the things that we need to say. So maybe this whole aspect of how much coaching is necessary and what kind of coaching, right, is something that we need to sort of set boundaries about. And this is also these 3 people displaying a poor sense of boundary for themselves, right? While they have good intentions, maybe they have enough experience to know that it doesn't help somebody who's in their position. So as somebody who's sort of who's in the, you know, face of all of this, where all 3 people are telling me what to do, I would there is no right way to respond to that. At the end of the day, it comes down to whatever that person there is, whatever state that they are in. Like, for example, if somebody does that to me, I might feel confident enough to say, you know, like, it's none of your business. Can you like mind your own, or like, can you please walk away from here? Or I might just stare at them and they'll know what is up. So there are lots of ways in which people communicate. So when it comes down to that, different people, again, comes down to that, you know, power imbalance, the perceived power imbalance. Whether is this my space to, can I express myself here? Will I be accepted for what I want to say? Is it okay to say this to somebody even though they make me feel this way, right? And sometimes maybe normalization of, you are not confident, therefore you are feeling this way, you are not able to process the good information that your teammates are giving you. So it's such a personal thing there. Maybe the first thing that we can do is self-work on what we are choosing to contribute and what we are choosing to omit. So if one person is already giving somebody some feedback, maybe I don't have to, you know, say the same thing. So it's drawing my own boundaries, my own, yeah.
Got it.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Guys, any other questions? Or we can wrap this party up.
Wow, can't believe I've done 4 sessions.
It was great. Seriously, it was so great. And I think it kind of got all of us, like, I mean, I can speak for myself, that it really got me to think about different situations in so many different ways and actually see, I guess, things differently. So great.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for doing this.
You're welcome. And when it comes to human resource and psychology, there is definitely no like one thing that fits everybody, because as a, you know, as a study of a group, then yes, psychology makes sense. You can predict, you can say this is what will happen. But at the end of the day, there's always that individual who's part of that, right? And their own socialization, their learned experiences, the way, the values and priorities that they've taken on as a person. So, what's helped me maybe is to sort of understand where my moral or value judgments come in, and where they don't need to be sort of, um, they don't need to be the primary method of interaction, or the primary lens which through I interact with somebody. Because, well, at the end of the day, people are not good or bad, and that's something like I need to maybe believe in.
Got it.
Cool.
Awesome.
Thanks for all this, and
Thank
thanks
you
for
so
joining.
much. It's been great.